It's 3 a.m. in New York, 10 in Kiev, and 4 on a Wednesday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Gon-young. You're watching ARIRANG, Korea's only global network. Now, this just coming in, a Thai court has ruled that Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra must step down over abuse of power charges. The Constitutional Court ruled that Yingluck acted illegally when she transferred her national security chief. The ruling comes after months of political deadlock in Thailand amid anti-government protests that have been trying to oust the Prime Minister since November 2013. We'll have more on that story in our later newscast. Now, back here in this country, 3 weeks have passed since the Solo ferry capsized off the southwestern coast of Korea. 269 people are confirmed dead so far, and 33 still remain missing. Let's bring you up to speed on the latest efforts there. Let's go live to our Kim Ji-yeon at the News Center. Now, Ji-yeon, we all know that the search operations are very dangerous for all of those involved, which was only underscored yesterday by the death of an experienced diver. Now, what is being done to ensure the safety of the rescue divers today?
Well, Kon-young, more medical staff have been deployed at the accident site. And up until now, there was only one emergency technician on the boat that served as a station for the divers before going into the waters. More medical staff were some 900 meters away from the ferry site, but there was criticism that transporting an injured diver to the staff would be a waste of precious minutes. And as you mentioned, Kon-young, the change comes after a civilian diver died while searching for the bodies that remain unaccounted for. At least 116 divers are on standby to help the search of the Seoul ferry on Wednesday.
Right, so the search operations there for the missing continues down in Jindo. Meanwhile, the investigations on why and how the ferry sank are also proceeding at a very fast pace, I believe.
That's right, Kon-young. Well, authorities have arrested 4 officials of the ferry operator over their alleged involvement in overloading cargo on the ferry, which is seen as one of the main reasons it capsized. It has found that the ferry operator, Chongli Marine Company, routinely overloaded its vessels with cargo for profits worth millions of dollars. Also, the prosecutors are considering charging 15 crew members of the Seoul ferry with murder for abandoning the vessels without helping passengers to safety.
And where do things stand with regards to the investigations into the business irregularities of Yoo Byung-hun? Of course, he's the de facto owner of the ferry operator.
Well, the prosecutors are casting a wide net. They are looking into Byung Gi-chun, the president of I1I Holdings, as well as Himo Group President Ko Chang-hwan. I1I Holdings owns a large stake in Cheonaeji, a shipbuilding unit that holds the largest stake of the ferry operator. The two figures are suspected of providing slush funds to Yoo Byung-hun, the de facto owner, worth tens of millions of dollars. I'll be back in later newscasts with more updates.
And the public anger and outrage over this Solo ferry disaster is prompting the Korean government to act swiftly and fill in the gaps in safety regulations. The government has announced plans to introduce an inspector within the Maritime Ministry to oversee not only the safety management of vessels, but also the areas in which they operate. Now, during a cabinet meeting Wednesday, officials also discussed shifting the current maritime safety system that focuses on emergency response to one that focuses more on preventing accidents. Under the change, a presidential decree would determine who is subject to safety inspections and when a vessel operator is required to submit its safety records. The measures are meant to address criticism that mismanagement and lax oversight led to last month's ferry accident. Meanwhile, over in New York, the state of New York Senate has passed a bill that requires the dual use of the Korean name East Sea and the Japanese name Sea of Japan to refer to the body of water that separates the two countries. At a general session Tuesday, the state Senate passed the bill in an overwhelming 59-1 vote. Now, the bill requires the dual usage of both names in all school textbooks from July 2016 in that state. And of course, for it to become law, the bill has to pass the lower house as well. A similar bill on the East Sea name was passed in the state of Virginia back in March. And spurred by their success, Korean-American civic groups plan to push for the similar legislation in states with high Korean-American populations like California and New Jersey. Meanwhile, prior to the vote, the New York State Senate adopted a resolution expressing its condolences for the victims of the Sewol ferry disaster.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Moon Gon-yong. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Now, shifting our focus, there is a warning from South Korea's top diplomat. Seoul's foreign affairs chief Yoon Byung-se has said that a potentially devastating military collision in Northeast Asia is not something that is impossible given the geopolitical climate in this region. Minister Yoon's comments come as Japan strengthened its military ties with NATO through a new partnership deal during Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's trip to Brussels. Here's our Yurian with this report.
South Korea's Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se says a military conflict could be on the cards in Northeast Asia, a region plagued by historical, regional, and security-related tensions. Speaking at the International Peace Institute in New York City on Tuesday, Yoon expressed his grave concern over the increasing rivalry in Northeast Asia. He noted China's emerging power, Japan's aim to make a comeback as a regional power, and Russia taking a tougher stance against the West. Minister Yoon said this, coupled with North Korea's ongoing nuclear threats, is creating serious changes to the geopolitical sphere of Northeast Asia, as well as to the Korean peninsula. The foreign minister's words of warning come as Japan tries to secure more military power. On Tuesday, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe signed a new partnership agreement with NATO that will deepen Tokyo's cooperation with the Western Military Alliance in areas including counter-piracy and humanitarian assistance. Speaking to ambassadors from the 28 NATO nations in Brussels, Abe also called for increased military freedom in Northeast Asia. Expressing concern over China's heavy military spending, the Japanese leader reiterated his wish to exercise the right to defend an ally under armed attack. Under the current interpretation of the constitution imposed after the Second World War, Japan is unable to settle international disputes using military force, even if it comes under attack. Abe said a panel of security experts is currently looking into changing this, with the government expected to come up with a policy on global peacekeeping operations. Yurian, ARIRANG News.
With speculation swirling over when North Korea might carry out a fourth nuclear test, a senior Chinese official who's viewed as being a messenger between the North and the United States is now in Washington. He held talks with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry on Tuesday, where North Korea's nuclear program topped the agenda. Our Kim Hyun-bin has the details of their discussion.
The director of the International Department of China's Central Committee of the Communist Party held talks with U.S. Secretary John Kerry at the Department of State on Tuesday, local time. Wang Jieru, considered a messenger between China and North Korea, is believed to have discussed issues related to the Korean peninsula with Kerry, namely the North Korean nuclear threat and a possible resumption of the six-party talks. U.S. diplomatic sources note that Wang's visit to Washington is rare and added that he is scheduled to meet with key U.S. diplomatic figures during his stay. It represents the latest development in a bid to curb North Korea's nuclear development. Last month, China's representative to the six-party denuclearization talks, Wu Da-wei, met with his U.S. counterpart Glenn Davies in Washington and New York, although they failed to come up with a concrete plan to advance talks. The sense of urgency is spurred by increased activity at the North Korea's Punggye-ri nuclear test site. Recent satellite images show that North Korea has sealed a nuclear tunnel shaft there, suggesting it could conduct the fourth nuclear test at any given time. Most experts agree that Pyongyang is capable of carrying out a test in the near future, but South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff is trying to downplay the speculation. It says Pyongyang has opened and sealed the tunnel numerous times before, and that the move doesn't necessarily mean a test is imminent. but added that it is keeping a close watch on the situation regardless. North Korea has conducted 3 previous nuclear tests, most recently in February of last year. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
Well, it's definitely something we hope to never see, but a U.S. lawmaker says that if a war were to break out on the Korean Peninsula, Washington would deploy 20 Marine brigades to help defend the South. This is according to Howard McKeon, the chairman of the U.S. House Armed Services Committee. And when asked Tuesday about war plans on the Korean Peninsula during a debate on next year's National Defense Authorization Act, McKeon said 20 brigades would be mobilized. But some say federal budget cuts could make those plans unrealistic. The number of brigades in the Marine Corps is expected to drop to 21 once the cuts are complete, which would leave just 1 brigade in reserve. The United Nations Human Rights Council has given a 268 recommendation list to North Korea for its various human rights violations. They came from the UN Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Tuesday after a review on North Korea's human rights violations. With its prison camps and public executions, North Korea will now have to state which recommendations it will accept. The UN is urging Pyongyang to close its prison camps and to seriously address the issues of prisoners of war and separated families. Now, this report will be made public at the next Human Rights Council meeting in September. On the heels of a 4-day holiday weekend, the local currency soared to its highest level in nearly 6 years this Wednesday on strong exports and the weakening greenback. The Korean won finished the trading day at more than 1,022 won, which is up nearly 8 won from last Friday, which was the last trading day. Now, the gain comes as the U.S. dollar depreciated against major currencies on weaker than expected economic growth in the first quarter. Analysts also attribute the won's recent appreciation to Korea's prolonged current account surplus. Now, global investment banks expect the won to remain strong against the dollar for now, as Seoul currently allows for the won's appreciation. There is speculation, however, that authorities may intervene to prevent the won from breaching the 1,020 level. Meanwhile, Korea's biggest companies reported weaker earnings last year compared to a year earlier, casting further doubt on the nation's moderate pace of recovery. According to data compiled by market researcher FN Guide Wednesday, the pre-tax profits of 87 affiliates under the nation's 10 major conglomerates dropped almost 15% last year from 2012 to around $50 billion US. When taking Samsung Electronics out of the equation, the drop is even more pronounced at more than 30%. The poor performance of local companies also hit corporate tax collection. It dropped nearly 6% to $10 billion in 2013 from a year earlier. Now, after the botched government response to the Seoul ferry disaster, a great deal of criticism has been leveled at the harmful actions or inaction of former government officials heading public organizations. Now, among the 38 heads of public agencies or government monitoring for reckless management, almost half were so-called parachute appointments. Our Kim Min-ji tells us what they are.
Light has been shed on a series of parachute appointment cases at public institutions. Data has shown that almost half of former government officials that held the top positions of public institutions got their jobs from cronyism and not really based on their qualifications. Among the 38 heads of public organizations under the priority control of the government for reckless management, 18 were former government officials. Former officials of the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy now head public organizations such as the Korea Trade Insurance Corporation and the Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power. The heads of other public institutions, including the Korea Exchange and the Korea Deposit Insurance Corporation, were from the Ministry of Strategy and Finance. A list of officials from other ministries, the Maritime, Culture, Transportation, Agriculture and Fisheries, also held top rankings of public organizations. In some cases, there were former government officials that were not even related to the job, while at others, former politicians held top-ranking positions. More than half of the standing auditors at these so-called reckless management public institutions were former government officials, while 31% of them were non-executive directors and 18% executive directors. The Korea Deposit Insurance Corporation had the highest ratio of such officials, followed by the Korea Gas Technology Corporation and Gangwon Land Corporation. Experts say the normalization of public institutions should begin with the rooting out of these parachute appointments. 김민지, 아리랑 뉴스.
It's history in the making in the stock listings world. Alibaba, one of the world's fastest growing internet companies, has officially filed its initial public offering in the U.S., and it could be one of the biggest ever. Our Connie Lee explains.
Alibaba is not only the biggest online marketplace in China, according to some reports, it's the biggest online marketplace in the world. And now the e-commerce giant has its eyes on the US, officially filing to launch an initial public offering there. In its registration statement, the Chinese company said it plans to raise $1 billion, but analysts say the amount is likely to go much higher. Some expect its IPO to surpass that of Facebook, which raised $16.4 billion in 2012, while others expect Alibaba's offering to be as big as credit card company Visa, which raised nearly $20 billion in 2008. If the total surpasses that amount, Alibaba's IPO could become one of the largest ever in the U.S. Based on the average estimate from a dozen analysts surveyed by Bloomberg News, Alibaba is valued at $168 billion. So what exactly is Alibaba? Simply put, the online marketplace is described as a mixture of Amazon, eBay, and PayPal, but with sales that trumpet those three online sites. Alibaba accounts for about 80% of online shopping in China, and although it's widely known there and among global tech industry watchers, Alibaba is much lesser known in the West. The tech giant is set to make its debut either on the New York Stock Exchange or the Nasdaq sometime this summer. It was in 1999 when the company was founded in eastern China by 49-year-old Jack Ma. He was worth $4 billion last year. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
Young Koreans have been suffering sharp deteriorations in their credit ratings since the global financial crisis, and fresh data released on this Wednesday backs this trend. According to the Bank of Korea today, the credit ratings for teenagers and those in their 20s worsened after the 2008 financial crisis. Not a sign of healthy economy. Let's try getting a clearer picture on this issue. For that, our regular contributor, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, joins us live in the studio. Welcome back after a long holiday.
Thank you.
Now, so it surely isn't a fun time being a 20-something Korean living in this country now.
Right, exactly. What's happening is the overall credit rating, at least the average of those people who have been measured by the company that was commissioned by Bank of Korea, we are seeing those Koreans in their 20s and younger. They're facing their credit rating going down altogether. And the drop seems to be quite significant. And what's most significant here is that it seems to be that average credit rating rank seems to be hitting the lowest point ever. And especially the drop seems to be sharper since the 2008. So this is a cause of concern in the minds of many people, especially the policymakers who are concerned about this supply of credit to young people, especially those college students here in Korea who are studying, in the universities, and government has been encouraging overall supply of credit to those students, so that even if these students don't have enough means at home to attend college, they can borrow this money from these kind of public, credit supply agencies and continue their study. But overall, the outcome, at least for now, seems to be not that positive. So this is a big cause of concern.
Right. I mean, it cannot be good news if you're, if you haven't really started a career yet and already your credit ratings are bad. So how fast, how quickly is youth credit ratings averages dropping? Right.
We should bring up the graph that we have prepared to talk about that. And let's bring it up on the screen here. And what's happening is overall, those Koreans in their 20s, we see, by the way, the credit rating system, let me explain first. Korea has like 10 different levels of credit rating. And from 1 to 4, it's considered to be good credit rating. And 5 to 6, it's a middle range. And from 7 to 10, they are not so good or not so positive credit rating. And if you belong to the 10th level, that's the worst case. And here, this is the average. And what we have is Bank of Korea commissioned this study, and this Korea Credit Bureau collected about 500,000 cases. So this is not full population data, but rather this is a sample data. And from that sample, they got the average. And the average you can see is for those Koreans in their 20s, their credit rating declining from 5.14 down to 5.44 within the time period of about like 5 years here. So this is a significant drop. And I'm a little bit puzzled about that before 20s graph. They call it in their 10s. And I'm thinking, well, who can be actually borrowing this credit in this?
As a teenager.
Exactly, age group. So I'm thinking about perhaps those college students in their freshman years or sophomore years. So those are the ones. And so naturally, if we take that for granted, then the population size for that age group cannot be big. So I don't know how representative that would be, even though it shows considerable drop there. So I wouldn't, at this point, to be too much concerned about that. The first age group before 20s. Rather, I would pay attention to that, in their 20s group, because this is the group that represents or include those people who are currently in college, as well as those people who have left the college and possibly beginning or failing to begin their career at this point.
We're looking for jobs, right?
Exactly, those youngsters. So that curve for that age 20 group is something important.
Right. So how do these youth credit movements, credit ratings movements, compare with other age groups? Are other age groups doing better?
Right. I think that's a very important question. Let's bring up another graph that will tell us that story there. What we know here is that other age groups seem to be all doing quite okay. We don't we are not particularly excited about the fact that the average lingering around like a 4 to 5 category here, because we want it to go higher. But still, those Koreans in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s and older, they seem to be kind of stabilizing, and especially a higher age group, they seems to be doing better. Those Koreans in their 30s, their credit standing seems to be a little bit worsening, but I don't think we can say that for sure. I actually take it rather comforting to see those Koreans in their 30s, which who are the people who have been spending a few years after the college, showing that level of credit rating seems to be not something that's negative here. And 50s, 60s, they seem to be a little bit improving, and analysts are saying that's because more of older people are working harder these days, while younger people here in Korea are having harder time finding their jobs.
Right. So this has I suppose, a correlation with the unemployment situation amongst the youth here in Korea.
Jobs and better credits.
Yes, jobs and better credits. So essentially, what needs to be done to address this issue?
I think this fundamentally raises an issue about the credit supply to young people here in Korea, because the government, this government and the previous government has been expanding their credit supply, lending to the college students in college big time. The growth has been very fast, and maybe that's not being well managed here. So here's the dilemma. Do we want to tighten the credit to the students? In that case, maybe we can reduce moral hazard where the students are feeling not as much pressure to pay back their credits, which may be the result of this, the graph that we're seeing here. But then again, if we do that, we see more students who are in need finding less of money to be found to pay their tuition and all that. So that's not necessarily positive. But status quo, right, at this point where we see the curve falling, is not something that we want to be in place. So this is a dilemma, and I think we need to discuss more. And I'm sure the policymakers are giving their thoughts to this about what to do. So there could be different options, but we can talk about it later.
Right. Definitely a solution needs to be brought up and designed to help out these younger generation, younger youth groups.
Right.
All right, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, thank you so much for today, and we'll speak to you tomorrow.
Okay.
And that is your business today on this Wednesday. Thank you for watching. Do join us again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.